Welcome back to Get to the Good Part. My name is Ryan.
My name's Chris.
And I'm Aaron.
And this week we have something a little bit special for you. As some of you may know, if you follow us on Twitter, just the other day, I think 2 days ago from the night we're recording this, it was our 1 year anniversary as a podcast. Hurrah!
Woo!
Quite an achievement. And here we are. I think right now we're going to be recording chapter 18 next week, so we haven't quite made it into the 20s yet, but we're well on our way. This episode is going to be a little bit different. Like I said, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be recapping level 1. That's chapters 1 through 16 in the book. He's got it split up into 3 different levels, and I figure we'll go back and do a retrospective on each level as they pass us. The level 1 is, the setup to the book. I think when we were talking before we hit record tonight, Chris was kind of saying that level 1 is A New Hope. It's Star Wars A New Hope to a certain degree.
Well, it's got a lot of cross on it, right? I mean, you're starting with a kid that has lost his parents. So again, we go back to that trope of not knowing his own background and his own history really very well, and then kind of discovering more about himself and that story fleshing out him finding out who his arch nemesis is, and coming to a place at the end where everything actually is really peachy keen. Like, where do you go from here? Episode 4 pretty succinctly wraps it up with giant Death Star explosion and reward. And here at the end of this is his reward as he gets the kiss as he finishes off chapter 17. So I don't think it's beat for beat, but I think it's the origin story in a 3-part book. And the first part is just self-discovery and discovering his place in the world.
Battle is won, war far from over.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked before about the origin story angle, and, there are certain correlations. I remember talking, I can't remember what episode it was now. I want to say it was like episode 3. But there was this moment where Wade is walking, or he's climbing down the stacks, and he looks over at the horizon and is like watching the sun rise over the stacks. It's when he's about to log into school for the first time. And when I first read that part of the book, I was like, oh my God, that's like that moment where Luke is
looking longingly at the 2 suns on the horizon.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that moment where the adventure is about to begin. Like there was just this through line there in the story, and just that image. It was like, oh my God, that's like blatant. At least I thought so. I remember telling John about it, and he was just kind of like, yeah, I just thought he was climbing down some trailers. He did not agree, but
it's some people almost don't get deep.
It's almost like the horizon in a lot of storylines always represents an adventure in the distance. There's something far off that you're looking towards that you're going to have to move towards. And I mean, it's not literal because it's just the fucking sun on the horizon, but it's always this, when you look off into the distance, what you're really looking at is there is a long path ahead of me. And that sort of represents either the setting sun, which is going into darkness, or rising sun, which is going into light. And I've always found that to be, whether or not it's on purpose, kind of an interesting bit of symbolism.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty common trope, I think, in science fiction, especially, to frame it up as you've got this journey ahead. And, really Ready Player One plays out like a trilogy in and of itself. I think that's why he splits it up into the 3 chapters. But I mean, you got the 3 keys, it's sort of set up like a trilogy in and of itself, which is why it's kind of interesting to me that he's said that there's going to be a sequel to this book. And that's something we've talked about on the podcast before, but I wonder how that works. How do you play off of a story that is, set up to end at a point? You know what I mean? I guess not.
I was waiting for Aaron to jump in. I've already said a shitload of stuff so far. Spotlight.
I was trying to figure how to talk through that point without getting too much into the way the book ends.
Yeah. We could steer away from it. I mean, it's just a thought.
I would have said that he made it up to be level 1, 2, and 3, so that when they did make it into a movie, it'd be a 3-part movie.
Yeah.
That would have been awesome.
I kind of wonder if it was pitched that way, but the more that I look at the trailers, the more the trailers give away more beyond part 1.
Yeah.
And it feels very much like they've taken the book, really chopped it down to all the action sequences with some made-up filler, and boom, it's just going to be the whole book is one movie, unless they make this into a 3-parter that they're just doing in one giant shoot, and that's not unheard of.
But the thing is, though, I mean, whoever gets it, like we said, we're going to try to stay away from spoilers, but somebody clearly gets the crystal key at the end of the trailer.
Yeah, but again, it might also be that is a foreshadowing of a part of the third movie. Thus, they're giving you some shit in the first trailer that kind of encompasses everything a little bit, but you'll only get so far in this series of 3-parters.
Yeah.
So, the trailer might actually cover parts of future movies that we don't see. And again, not totally unheard of, although I doubt that's the case.
Yeah, I would doubt it. I think it's going to get the Ender's Game treatment. And what I mean by that is in the book takes place over a significant period of time, but the movie takes place in what feels like days.
Ugh, yeah. That felt fucking rushed.
Didn't it?
God bless, yes. I mean, they could have spent a whole first movie on him, basically getting worked up in space and discovering more about tactics. And, they really could have felt that plot a little bit.
I'm gonna flash back to our first conversation on this podcast and have a Willow moment here, but I have never read Ender's Game.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a good book. As a teenager, that was one of those books that for me was important because it, if anything, taught how to think outside of the box, sort of, and that was Ender's strength, was that he approached his training based on how other people treated him, which was shitty, and also based on limitations, which was that he wasn't allowed to fight, or he would figure out how to break those rules, or he would go and he would play in different ways between battles and figure out ways to approach the battle from different angles that other people weren't doing. I don't know. It just for me, it was that one book that solidified that kind of cheesy idea of thinking out of the box.
Sure. So back to Ready Player One, the book we cover on this podcast. I should read it. I should read Ender's Game because I've never heard anybody say really anything bad about it. I mean, I've heard bad things about it, but it usually comes from the type of people who rip Ready Player One. The kind that think books shouldn't be fun; they should just be criticized over tea and pretentiousness. Sorry if you're one of those people out there. If I offended you. I don't give a shit. I've taken my barbs since we started this podcast. If they get butthurt a little bit, I'm good with that.
Ender's Game is one of those. Actually, Ender's Game is a lot less fun than this book because it's basically kids being treated as adults and put into adult situations. There is no romance story. Not in Ender's Game, the book. There might be in follow-ups. There were no romance stories. It was purely a kid dealing with grown-up situations and having to make grown-up adult decisions, but still being a fucking kid. So in that sense, kind of weird.
Could you imagine how ruined that book would have been if they added a romance angle to that?
There could have been like one of the peeps he befriends quite deeply is female and ends up he ends up commanding her and a number of other people, Bean and so on, and that could have happened, but he just didn't take it that way. He didn't move in that direction.
We are doing a retrospective on Ready Player One, the book by Ernest fucking Cline.
You fucking went back to
it. No, if you want to do it is relevant, because you have the whole Parzival Artemis thing that's going on, and is that, how does it affect the story, and where. I just keep thinking about the stories that I enjoyed that I thought were ruined by the romance angle. Like the Matrix.
Right. I was thinking the exact same thing.
Worst part.
What about the Matrix?
How with the Trinity Neo.
Oh
thing.
my God, that was so forced and so awful, and it was so unfeeling. Like I just could not feel. I mean, there was more love in John Wick for the puppy than there was for Trinity as him playing Neo. It was just the chemistry just was so flat.
You know what? You know one movie that really like romance ruined it for me.
Romancing the Stones.
When Harry Met Sally.
It's in the title. No.
Ghostbusters.
Guys, is Sleepless in Seattle.
Oh, it was so close.
No, it was Interstellar. I agree with that critique of Interstellar.
Interstellar?
That love is like the thing that connects people across galaxies. It's just like, I could do without that.
Oh my God, yeah.
I think I could do without that.
What's the solution to this really awesome sci-fi thing? Well, we're going to go into that black hole over there because I can't think of anything else better to do in the moment. And, look, it just so happens to be like this really cool kick-ass matrix through time that I can reach out with love. It lost me. I was like, okay, looks it's got the
reach out through love via a bookcase at a farmhouse in like Iowa or wherever the fuck it is.
Some really dusty place.
There's some ways that that movie could have ended in so many fucked up ways. Like, fine, he ends up in the black hole. He ends up in the bookshelf. He moves some shit. And then his daughter just walks past it. He's like, fuck, that didn't work. How the hell do I get out of here? Oh, shit.
Stuck in
a fucking bookshelf.
It would be like the end of a Twilight Zone episode. There was time now.
And that would be like the end of the movie. It would be like he's stuck in the bookshelf in time. Whoops.
It's kind of like the end of Quantum Leap.
I didn't see the end of Quantum Leap. I think there was a shark that was leapt in Quantum Leap that kind of made me drop.
The entire series was a fucking leapt shark. It's about a guy who enters into, well, I mean, they recap it at the beginning of literally every episode of that show. But what do you think was the shark that got jumped? I think I might know what you're going to say.
Dude, I don't know. I saw so many episodes, and at some point I was just like, I'm done with this.
And God, I don't know if I want to bring this up on the podcast because I don't want to come off as insensitive.
We can edit it out.
Damn it.
No.
Go with it. I won't make.
There were a couple uncomfortable episodes of Quantum Leap. Anyways, now we sound like we are literally in our own basement talking about the things we love.
Is it when he jumps into the mentally handicapped kid and they have a romantic relationship? Oh, I knew it. That was uncomfortable. I was like, oh, this feels kind of off. Like this would be illegal.
Well, I remember I was binging it. I was like, this is back in college, and I was binging Quantum Leap because it was a little before my time. And I got to the end because, they would always preview at the end of the episode what he was going to be jumping into the next week.
Right.
And it was pretty late at night. And then that scene came up where he looks in the mirror and see who he's going to be. And I was like, holy shit. How are they going to play that story? Unbelievable.
I think back when that aired, people were a little less sensitive than they are today.
Probably. Yeah.
It was like alongside reruns of Dukes of Hazzard, which were at the time tame and harmless.
Where they rolled around with a Confederate flag on the roof of their car for the entire fucking series.
Which you couldn't do today.
Yeah, like no one blinked twice about that. Like that was just kind of like, isn't that just Southern and funny?
And let me just say, like, I don't yearn for those years again. Totally. I mean, some of that stuff, it's pretty good to wipe it off the pages of history. But at any rate, let's move out of the political and back into the Ready Player One, because after all, that's what this fucking podcast is supposed to be about.
All right.
I wanted to kind of go back and talk about some of the highlights of level 1 for you guys. I mean, we kind of talked about them a little bit before we started recording tonight, but we haven't really had this kind of retrospective conversation before, so we'll just fuck it, we'll do it live.
Fuck it, do it live.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, let's think back. I mean, like, so far to each of you, what has been the best chapter of the first 16?
Ooh, that's tough. I don't know if I can pin it to one chapter, but I think my favorite part of level 1 is just the world building and learning about the Oasis and what you can do in there and how the public education system works. And because every time I listen to this book, I hear all this stuff and I'm like, God damn it, where is that already? Like, that just sounds awesome. And it just makes me want it. Like, I want that shit now. And every time I read it without exception, I'm just going there and I'm like, God, that'd be cool. It'd be really cool.
It would be. It will be. It's pretty close, it seems like.
It feels like there's very strong undercurrent between VR, between virtual reality and the sort of altered reality that we're moving towards digitally. And there is it feels like a bit of a race between VR and AR in regards to what's going to be the dominant entertainment technology. It feels very much like the VHS versus Betamax war. And it's not exactly like that because they are two distinctly different experiences, but technologies are ramping up, I think, because there's this anticipation of the movie coming out. And that once it's demonstrated what could be done, it will plant the seed for a demand that businesses will get funded on.
It is kind of serendipitous, isn't it? For Ernest Cline, that like there was this like awakening of VR, because like I mean, Oculus, when did Oculus really come onto the scene, Chris?
It's been years, but it's been in production for, it feels like 10 years or more. Like Oculus has really been in development, and then it's been on the market. I just shooting from the hip here, it feels like maybe 5 years.
But Oculus was the driver of the modern VR conversation, right?
It was at the very least the most heavily publicized in my memory.
Right. And so Oculus was well into development by the time this book came out, right?
I would be willing to guess, yeah.
I mean, even from, and I don't know if we've ever covered it or if it's just a bit of trivia that I'm forgetting, but I don't recall when he said he started writing this book. But I would wager that Oculus was on its way before this book was written, or before he started writing it. I don't know for sure. But I mean, it's like I said, it's more serendipitous than anything that VR would have this huge resurgence around the time, in within the time frame of the book being released, really kind of between 2010 2018, like now. Just interest in VR growing, and then you've got this vehicle to give people and say, this is, if you're struggling to imagine the possibilities through VR, this book is a really good example of what it could look like.
Well, and here's an interesting thing, is that Oculus Rift started as a Kickstarter campaign in 2012. Ready Player One came out in 2011. So it could very well be that the book came before the technology, that the book may have inspired the technology early on, or that maybe seeds were planted in parallel that was beginning to bring it both in fiction and reality at the same time. But Oculus Rift hit their Kickstarter campaign in 2012. They released their product in 2016. It might have actually been earlier than that. So it might have been like 2014. I see March 2014 as a date here. But still, we're talking many years later.
I think VR was appearing in fiction way before that. Like, when did Lawnmower Man come out?
Sure.
Oh yeah, that's 80s.
90, or is that late 80s or early 90s? For some reason, my gut was saying 92.
92.
Wow, boom. Fuck, that's great. Yeah, it is 92. Well done. Yeah, and you're right, because he did have that headset, and he did have that suspension device that kind of allowed him to function with this area of reality around him, where what he did interfaced with the digital world, and it was a very large sort of construct, if I remember rightly.
But the porting of reality, of business and culture into the virtual space was not explored really in Lawnmower Man, as I recall.
No,
Right.
but you know where, if memory serves, it was sort of
Tron?
the
Is that where you're going?
No, the movie
Damn.
Disclosure.
Disclosure. I don't think I've seen that.
Michael Douglas and Demi Moore. Never seen it?
No,
Mm-mm.
I've not.
Well, so they work for some company or whatever like that, and they have like this IT guy who kind of like set up their whole like business servers, like this virtual reality thing. And there's a scene where Michael Douglas has to put on a headset and get on this kind of this pad that simulates, you know, the ground surface, and he's trying to navigate the company servers, and that was in '94.
It was in 94.
And the other, I mean, I guess the closest that I could think in a movie would be Total Recall, but I think that even is slightly different because it's not really like a virtual world. It's more of
No.
like a dream state that he's put in. Like I think they're feeding his brain just feeding his brain that information.
Yeah, that's kind of like D&D on steroids, not really
Yeah.
a virtual reality. I'm trying to think what other movies had a virtual reality component to it. And
Strange Days, a 1995 movie. It had oh bless, it had a number of peeps in it. It had Angela Bassett, Julia Lewis, Tom Sizemore was in it. But the gist was that you were purchasing memories, and there was a headset on, but you also had other such interactions with your brain. And this wasn't a situation per se of a virtual reality so much as you were virtually experiencing somebody else's experiences.
So that's sort of like Total Recall.
Yeah, I'd say.
Okay. So yeah, that's getting outside of the virtual realm. But no, I mean, you know, knowing that Oculus, you know, they started their Kickstarter a little bit after the book was launched. I mean, that makes it interesting. Now, I think that, you know, Ready Player One and the success that it had kind of proved that virtual reality was a vehicle of interest, I think, for people. You
Right.
know what I mean? Because like you love this book for the escapism, I think. We can probably all agree on that, right?
Well, yeah.
definitely.
It like video games. It is the deepest level of escape. It is the ability to fully immerse yourself into something that is more expansive and more visceral than potentially the real world. And I think we do that a lot with video games, and you see a lot of news articles now about kids being addicted to their phones. But this idea that you can fully divide yourself between the real world and a virtual world, and that both sides have a great degree of sort of what matters. I think it goes in that direction.
Yeah, you know, I think that too kind of leads me to the next thing that we kind of brought up. I think within the first half of the podcast, but it was a recurring theme throughout. And I feel like this is a really good space to kind of, now that we've got 16 chapters to cover as opposed to just one, to look back. And I think it's a good time to have the conversation too, because the perspective, I think, without giving any spoilers, I think in level 2, you get a perspective shift on this. Now, the argument could be made, and like clearly it's one of the major themes of the book, is, you know, the society, the dystopian society that Earth is in 2045. Is it the result of something existing like the Oasis, or is the Oasis necessary because society is the way it is? That's something we talked about, you know, here and there in brief stints, but it to me is one of the major themes of the book. And as it stands, and try to think within the context of the first 16 chapters, I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, do you think the Oasis caused society to be where it is, or do you think that the society being what it is just created the need for the Oasis?
I think the book kind of hints at the world was kind of going to shit on its own, because he talks about, you know, how the ongoing energy crisis basically necessitated this virtual meeting of people within the Oasis. And I would think that if the Oasis was there ahead of time, then seeing how good it actually is at creating these virtual meeting spaces, so you don't have to go on vacation anymore. You can just kind of go onto these excursions in the Oasis. Then that would kind of suggest that energy crisis may not be necessary. It may not actually happen, because people would already not be traveling and taking planes and driving around as much, and all these things that he writes in the book as being contributing factors towards the shithole that they're in. I don't know.
I think
Go ahead.
that it's like two heavy bodies that find orbit around each other. And I'll give you an example, because we've already seen this before with cell phones or smartphones. Before Apple introduced their smartphone, there were PDAs. They sucked. There were phones that could access the internet. They sucked. There were phones that let you listen to music. They sucked. But somehow, the bringing together of technology into an interface that allowed for a greater degree of development and a greater degree of flexibility, the market just latched onto it and continues to do so today. And it heralded in the age of the internet and applications at our fingertips, rather than at a desktop, or sitting on top of a desk. Rather than you being chained to the internet at a desk, it is now with you wherever you go. You can be as smart as the smartest people on earth, no matter where you are, because you have it in your pocket. And that's just nothing we had before that in a very good form. And that crosses over to this idea of, you have a combination of a heavy situation of a lot of people impoverished and able to access cheap technology. And then you have, on this other hand, this technology that allows you to completely immerse yourself in a whole other world. And when you take these two things and combine them together, it's chocolate and fucking peanut butter. These are just two things that converge and feed on each other. And then from that, it's not which one is more influential. It's that both happen and feed on each other to get bigger. I think if people were not poor, there wouldn't be as much of a need to escape. Then the Oasis would be second rate to actually flying to Chile or flying to Asia. But that everyone's poor and everything's expensive makes the Oasis the first-rate experience that anyone can access. Without everybody being poor and the world going to hell in a handbasket, the Oasis wouldn't be as powerful as it is described in the book.
Because why fly to Chicago when you can hang out with Ferris Bueller there?
Exactly.
It's a fair point, because even someone dirt poor like Parzival is able to get online and hang out with people he wouldn't normally get to hang out with.
And go to places he'd never be able to go to. Like, he'd go to a fucking moon or sit on Neptune if he wants to.
And there's something to be said, too, with, I think the first 3 chapters of the book especially focus on the fact that, the thing that Wade, I think, really enjoys about the Oasis at the very beginning of the book is that you can be whoever the hell you want. He likes the fact that he's not himself in the Oasis. And that's something that I think I don't know if it gets left behind as the book goes on, but it's certainly, I think he takes a different angle on it. Because, especially now, as we're heading into chapter 18 on the podcast, but in the first 16 chapters, you're kind of seeing him come out of his shell a little bit. He's found this group of friends. And I think, too, and this is probably the most important thing, he has a level of confidence now. That confidence is gained within the Oasis and almost is exclusive to the Oasis, the win that he gets there. And that's something I don't really want to go too deep into, because, again, I'm getting beyond myself in chapters here, beyond our level 1 limitation here. But I think it's something that in level 1, it's about Wade disconnecting from reality almost to get away from himself.
Sure, I could get that, because you could ask the question, what is Wade without the Oasis? I mean, if you dissect the Oasis from who Wade is, who is he in the book? Like, how is he described?
I mean, he's an overweight kid from Oklahoma City with no parents and no caring family.
And nobody that knows he exists once he's in the Oasis. I mean,
Right.
He has literally no friends, literally, except for Mrs. Gilmore. All of his friends exist in the Oasis.
he's nothing without the Oasis. It's really what it comes down to. He's this, at best maybe a statistic, but no one anyone would miss in the real world.
And
Which
IOI proves that point.
Yeah,
yes, you're fucking right.
with great effect. But like, here's the thing to think about, and I tie this back to my own experience with like online friendships. I mean, hell, Aaron, we only know you through this podcast.
That's true.
You know what I mean? I've never met Aaron in real life. I mean, we know each other through this podcast.
So what you're saying is we need to make a road trip.
Well,
road trip.
Road trip. Yes, we should.
Where do you live again? DC, right?
Just outside of DC.
Dude, it's not far. It's like 7 hours.
It's true.
We should
It's
road
not
trip.
that far.
We should do a weekend.
I would be perfectly fine with getting out of Knoxville for a couple hours. No problem leaving this place. But anyways, but no, I have a group of friends that I've referenced before that I played Destiny with, and these guys I consider close friends. I mean, we lose contact sometimes, but most of the time we'll every few months or so we'll do a check-in kind of thing, and then every now and again we'll go on a tear and we'll play games for a few nights in a row. But I mean, these are people that I feel I'm pretty close with because we've spent a lot of time sitting down and talking together. And what do you do in any social situation, whether it's through some sort of interface or in person, it's still socializing. So if Wade had died in the Stacks explosion, do you think the grief would be any different for H?
No,
I
don't think it would be.
No, they're definitely tight in their friendship, and I would actually be very interested in a prequel that focuses on their friendship and how they met, and I think that would be a lot of fun.
I think there's a lot to be said with the fact that when you really get down to whether or not you exist as a person and perceive yourself, the only way that you really interface with your world is through the information that your body receives in. It's through the tingly sensations through your hands. It's through the electrical impulses of your eyes. All of these senses could be removed from you one at a time, and you'd be left sitting in the dark, which is your little hotel room with a window, if you will, unplugged from the oasis that is the real world for us, so that you experience friendship with something that has a sort of meta experience of sensory input, that it is through headphones versus necessarily your ears, that it's through a screen rather than with your eyes, that it's just one layer removed, I don't think makes it any less of a friendship. And I, just like you, Ryan, I have at least a dozen friends that I play with online that I have very detailed and in-depth friendships, probably stronger than a majority of the people I know in person, that I would even consider to be close. So you're right to that point. I don't think that would be any less hurtful if he died and he was missed by H in the Oasis, probably with the same kind of remorse, if not deeper.
And I think it speaks to that point too, like that, when he says, my life is in the Oasis, that's the only life I have. That's really the only life anyone has anymore, is within that, within the Oasis. That's it. I mean, when he talks about, like, it's very depressing when he goes outside of the Oasis.
Sure.
It's a fucking bummer because you have to face reality. It's this colorful, I mean, it's like the fucking tornado, and then you land in Oz and everything's color. Like, that's the way I feel about inside and outside of the Oasis.
And then she goes back and the world's a sepia again. She's like, this sucks.
Fuck this place.
You people are assholes. I really like to be over the rainbow again. That'd be nice.
Which is why when you go into Return to Oz, even though the outside world is in color, still, but in Return to Oz, I mean, she is pining for it. She's obsessed with the idea of Oz, whether or not it's real. It's just that rich sort of, better version of reality almost in some ways. There she's a hero. There she has these friends that she can connect with. And, they go on an adventure together. And whether or not it was real or head trauma, I think it's pretty well confirmed that it's head trauma. But still, she pines for that. And I think that's the sort of divorce, from reality, that people are looking for when they hop into the Oasis. And that's sort of the effect that if you were to pull the plug on the Oasis, I think that's that return to like a sepia life. I can't imagine what that would do to their society. It's just insane. We'll talk about that more toward the end of the book.
Well,
but
Dorothy can still go to Columbus, Ohio, because it glitters like Oz. She can get her fix that way.
the shining beacon on the hill of Columbus, Ohio.
There's no hill. There's no hill. It's flat. True. This is why tornadoes fuck that place up. It is so fucking flat. I think we kind of dance around the real question of why do we call the Oasis not real? Why are we even making a designation between real versus not real? Is it because
especially since reality is a simulation, Chris? We all know that.
As far as your senses are concerned, it is.
I know. I'm playing. But seriously though, I mean, I've gotten into the simulation theory thing, fairly. I think in the past years we've been researching this book. Like simulation theory is something that I've kind of delved into. But just to kind of, like when you're talking about who's to say that this isn't reality. You know what I mean? I think that the whole simulation theory thing has like a piece of the conversation here. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that reality is what you choose to affect your life. And if there's some continuity, for example, your dreams aren't reality because there's no continuity, or there rarely is. When you wake up and you go back to sleep, you're not picking up from where you were. Otherwise, you would consider it to be two forms of reality that have continuity. Whereas when you log into the Oasis, you are fully entrenched, physically, visually, auditorially, in a reality. It is a reality. It affects you. It affects other people. It affects the economy. It affects the kind of life that you have and live. I think it's very much a reality. I think it's very real. It's just that you live in two existing realities at that point.
God, could you imagine an open source reality? It would be equal parts great and just completely fucked up.
Source code on that would suck.
So you wouldn't say that what we call reality, the real world, is paper money, and the Oasis is Bitcoin?
It could be. Sure, I absolutely could call it that. Yeah, but I mean, keep in mind, Bitcoin is real. It has a very real effect. It is symbolically as real as anything else at this point, until it isn't. If you break everything down to symbols, then it's equally real across the board. All you're discussing is whether or not that symbol is tangible. And when we're talking about the Oasis, the symbolism within the Oasis is tangible as well.
And that's the sound of Chris Cantley blowing our collective minds as we listen to this podcast. No, but see, I'm playing, but seriously, it's an interesting topic to me. I mean, because if something could be so real as to not only compete with, but continually just beat out reality. You know what I mean? A place that's so immersive, you can get in there and you can trick yourself into believing that you inhabit this world. And to a degree, you do. I mean, it's interesting to flip that on its head and think about reality, in just how, like you were saying, how real is the desk that's in front of you, or the computer that's in front of you, or it's I sound like I am 15 years old and have just smoked weed for the first time. That's how I feel talking about this stuff. Like, what about God, man? But like seriously, it's so hard for me to even articulate because it's just such an awesome and intimidating concept.
I think it's neat. I think that maybe we should all, as an experiment, when we go to up to DC to visit, that maybe we should find somebody who has a sensory deprivation chamber, and we go and experience truly a different reality by not altering our perception of reality through an input of some sort, but by reducing the inputs that we naturally have.
See, Chris, this is why we don't hang out more often.
Come on, Ryan. Let's go get in a tank together and float in salt water.
Here's what we should do. Let's invite ourselves to our podcast co-host's house and then tell him and his wife that, hey, we're going to go hang out and we're going to steal Aaron for a while and go hang out in some sensory deprivation chambers.
We're going to go change reality, man.
People around here have other ways of doing that because pot is legal here now. Or no joke. I was walking to work the other day and somebody showed me their open palm with a chunk full of weed in it.
Really? Did they offer a price? Is that more than an ounce, buddy? Can you even carry that?
I think he was a little bit spooked because a cop car just went racing by. And I think he was just kind of like relieved that they weren't going after him. And he's like, oh, look what I got. And I'm just like, it's okay. I'm all right. I don't need that.
Ooh, that was close because I'm holding.
Exactly. It was a weird day.
I've heard about sensory deprivation, but I don't really know what it does for you.
It's you get into a tank that's completely dark. You float in heavily saturated salt water. So you're sort of neutral buoyancy. And you don't have to worry about floating is the gist here. The temperature is at your body temperature, so you don't even really feel the water. The gist is to reduce as much sensory input as possible to see what comes through after. Because when your mind is robbed of sensory input completely while you're conscious, your brain freaks the fuck out and has to compensate. That's how dreams happen. Your brain is compensating for a lack of sensory input while you're resting. But when you're not sleeping, what you experience is a whole other sort of mental reality from the inside.
That sounds fucked up.
It does sound fucked up and very unenjoyable.
For some people, it's very eye-opening.
So, did they change the water out in these tanks between?
It's salt water, I guess. I don't know. I didn't ask.
Where do you go to do that? Do they do this at like spas, or do you just like they do?
Some people have, like there are some spas I believe that have that. I think there are possibly private places that you can go, like,
Okay, Chris, I'm not going to any of those.
I mean, like,
that sounds fucked up.
If some dude decides to create the chamber, open a house, like a, where you stay the weekend, like a bed and breakfast, right? Well, this is like the bed and breakfast of getting high, I suppose. We're altering your reality.
Chris, no, it's not. If somebody opened their house to me and said, I'm going to lock you in a fucking tank.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn off all the lights and you're just going to float there in salt water.
Yeah.
And you're going to do this in my home.
Yeah.
With no regulations or anything. No,
cash
I'm not
only.
beholden to any sort of like government oversight or anything like that, or any sort of corporate structure. I'd be terrified.
There might be. I don't know. I guess it depends on the person. Depends on how under the tank the money is exchanged. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a cash-only business.
Yeah. Lots of waivers to sign before you go in there.
It's not like it's deep.
I don't give a damn if it's a kiddie pool. It's still fucking creepy. Just the concept of doing that in someone's home.
It's like a spa.
So when you're doing this, can you like check out the upside down?
That's right. They do this in Stranger Things, don't they? That's how like
actually
11...
that's a perfect example of that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's funny you should mention that because she is in sort of a full tank deprivation chamber.
She does it in a pool at the end, though, right? Like a kiddie pool.
Yeah.
And it's filled with salt. Remember, they have to go and get like shitloads of bags of salt.
Yeah.
So that she has that sort of neutral buoyancy going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm not doing that, Chris.
Not even in a kiddie pool.
No,
Okay.
not even a kiddie pool. Even if it was a completely
house?
safe environment. No, I'm not
Do it
doing
in your garage.
No. I'll admit this, okay? I'm gonna come out and say this before we move on to the next topic. But as a grown man, as a grown fucking 34-year-old with kids man, I am still terrified of the dark. Can't
Fair
do it.
enough. Fair enough. Fair. That's fair.
So-
All right.
The
Gotta have a
closest
laydown.
I've come to anything like this, I've floated in the Dead Sea before.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh man,
That is cool. I highly recommend. But I venture to say that might be the closest you'll get to me being in one of these sensory deprivation tanks.
so you don't
I
want to
don't
go
know.
with Chris when he comes to DC to some back alley to get locked up in a fucking pool?
Definitely not a back alley deprivation tank.
I don't know, or a front alley one for that matter. I can't imagine there is a front alley deprivation tank. Chris, if you can find one, will you please share it with us and the rest of the community who listens to this show to just prove that this is a fucking thing that exists?
Wait,
And-
It is.
so-
I've seen videos. Like,
Are we
what you can
keeping
look
this
up,
in? You're not going to cut this out?
dude. Like the DC area, there's a place called Sulex Float Spa, and there's another one that's called Hope Floats Bethsaida.
See, look,
That's-
no, this is
Bethesda.
the weird thing.
Bethesda.
Bethesda. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're already planning your vacation.
I
out to
kind of
DC. Aaron
Well-
still hasn't invited us out, Chris.
Well, we can always stay somewhere else.
Space it out a little bit.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just saying, like it could be a thing. Like I could go and I could do it, and then we can do a show immediately afterwards, or during, and then you could have like the before and after. Chris gets out of the hole.
This isn't the Today Show, Chris. This is a podcast about Ready Player One.
All right, fine, but let's face it. The full contraption as far as your gloves and your headset and your earphones, that's sensory deprivation. The difference is whether or not it's on or off.
I'll tell you what we should do. We should have a contest on the show when we get to the level 2 episodes. We should do a contest, and the winner.
Gets to go with Chris to the float tanks.
Yes. Or I
Oh
was
my
going to
God.
say, well, that sounds like a prize fitting for the loser
No,
of the contest. But
No, first prize goes in the float tank with Chris. Second prize gets to smoke pot with someone else.
Wait,
Well,
why
I
don't
mean,
I get both?
it would have to be you because it's not legal here in Tennessee.
I don't smoke pot. I've never have.
Neither have I.
Same.
Well, aren't we just the fun bunch?
Yeah,
Yeah,
hey, we're
yeah.
the cool kids at the table.
We're the dudes like in the corner at the party. I'm not smoking pot, man.
Who would have thought that 3 guys on a podcast about Ready Player One weren't the cool guys?
Or smoking pot, for that matter.
Yeah.
Me.
It's like half the audience is going to be like, "Really? These guys aren't smoking pot right now?"
No, they're probably thinking, man, you would probably like your show a lot better if you did.
This is why I always have a drink on hand when we do the podcast.
Energy drink. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what we need is a hyped up Chris coming up with more harebrained schemes to get us into back alleys floating around.
Uh,
I'm just kidding. I'm taking it farther than it should go.
So we came here to talk about a book, right?
Yeah.
We're-
Anyways,
So
depriving your senses is an important part of what we're talking about here, because you're leaving the shit-colored world. You know, this 2045, this dystopian shithole. Shithole's kind of a trigger word nowadays, but I think that
it happens
the world
to be in the U.S. I think it's fair.
I think so too, and it really is, but like probably worldwide at this point, because I mean the way it's framed at the beginning of the book is that this is very legitimately could be the end of the world, right?
Right.
I mean, it's the energy crisis and everything like that, and the economy. I mean, they're talking about like I think they mentioned that there have been nuclear wars.
Well, I mean, he basically says about news reports that about another city exploding in a mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I would love to see?
A city explode in a mushroom cloud?
No, I could
No.
watch Terminator 2 for that.
True.
And to make a Reddit joke, scientists say that this is the most accurate representation of a mushroom. Did you see that whole thing on Reddit? No, it was stupid as shit, but it was funny. But no, like Fallout, the Fallout series is like this alternate timeline that splits off after World War II, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the really interesting thing about it is like the lore is so deep that you can go back and you can read the history of the United States from World War II as it splits off. But you can also see maps of how the United States looks after the bombs hit. So that like the Mississippi River is like a dividing line for the United States. It's also one of the most toxic areas of the United States.
Right.
And it's just like it shows how that nuclear detonation or the several nuclear detonations affected the different areas of the United States based on down to their geography, like why it's so saturated where the Mississippi River is and stuff. It's really cool that they thought that far ahead, you know. And I would love to see like a map of the world in the Ready Player One universe, just to see like, you know, like are there certain countries that are just completely annihilated now? Because he talks about, you know, all over the world, or, you know, yada yada yada. I mean, it could be that there's an entire section of the United States that's completely uninhabitable.
And yeah, and that makes sense. Like it's as if lawlessness, it's as if hugging the cities is the only way to survive. Hence the stacks. People moving into the stacks and then leaving their cars. They will never leave the city again. There's nothing outside of the city to go to other than another city that's crowded. So cities become these sort of fortifications of poverty, whereas anything outside is lawlessness, and anything inside is semi-lawful.
And they talk about that too when he's on his trip to Columbus.
Yeah.
You know, how they have like armed guards on the buses to like fend off bandits.
It reminds me in my mind like a cross between the video game Borderlands and Fallout. Like there's this sort of mashup of experience there and the kinds of people that can come out of that and the experiences within it.
It reminds me of Union County, Tennessee, as it stands today.
You're talking about video games and your local geography. I'm just going to sit back and listen.
That's right. You're not a video game guy.
I'm not a video gamer, but I think that speaks to how great the book is, because like I was just like totally, and you know, got totally into the book. And you know, I had a Nintendo growing up, but I might have played a version of Call of Duty a long time ago. But that's kind of it. Oh, and I played Rock Band. But that's my gaming experience.
But yeah, I mean, but still, I mean, does that not pique your interest a little bit about like, you know, the deep lore of Fallout? And then
no, like that sounds really cool. Like the world building for the, you know, for that sounds really interesting. The fact that somebody had to think about it and probably get a lot of expert input, you know, to make it really plausible.
And we've seen a lot of fan fiction come out, especially from our own community. You know, just fleshing out the story, and most of it has to do directly with the hunt. But I would love to see some fan fiction come out of Ready Player One that further builds out the world, and I think we talked about this before, Chris, but like just something that further explains the society that this is all happening around in reality. You know, I would be interested in that. I think most people would probably be bored by it.
Well, when we talk about movies outside of this particular chapter, or not chapter, but this particular section of the book, this first sort of section or episode, if you will, that you could speak to a prequel that builds up to the point where the Oasis is explosively born into society, and the kind of setup of poverty and where that road comes to. Maybe you could do the story of Parzival's father and coming to a position where he ends up dying, but has sort of this history that he passes on to his son unknowingly to him, that sets him on the path in the direction that he goes. I think like you could create kind of a prequel to this setup that helps to sort of detail how the country gets formed from what it was into what it is in the period of the book.
Yeah, and we had talked about this. I can't remember if we were online or off, but we had talked about the idea of Wade's dad not having been just somebody who was like trying to rob food, but he was like involved in some sort of like resistance rioting kind of thing.
Right.
Like he could have been, part of some sort of faction that was working against, whatever evil faction was, was dictating the United States at that point.
It's believable.
But it's all speculation because there's nothing to back it up in the book. It's just imagination's wandering. But anyways, before we go down another rabbit hole, I've got one last thing, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys if there's anything you wanted to bring up. My last thing, and I want to do this before we go into, at the end of level 1, at the end of level 2 and 3 as well. But at this point, we're talking chapters 1 through 16. I know it's kind of hard to divorce your mind from this because you guys, like me, have read the book more times than you care to admit.
It's kind of blurry.
But between chapters 1 and 16, who's your favorite character?
It's an excellent question. And we don't have tons of characters to choose from, so that's helpful. I mean, is it too cliche to say that, because he's the main character, that Parzival is probably the most logical place to end up? Because he's who we know the most about. And, but I don't think I'm going to go there. Because I would say, even though we've not really heard much from him, I like Og. I love that exchange with the reporter. He's like, quick, you better cut me off before I say something else. I just, every time I hear that part, I just laugh. I'm like, I can picture it in my head. He just sounds like the most awesome guy. And so if I had to pick somebody other than the most natural place to end up, which would be, Wade Watt / Parzival, I kind of like the portrayal of Og thus far.
I get that. What about you, Chris?
I like where you're going with that. So I'm going to counter that with Anorak. And I think that what's overlooked in a lot of books and a lot of films is that the environment in which the film or the book takes place should become a character. Avatar. I don't mean Avatar as in like, elemental magic-y Avatar. I mean Avatar as in like the movie with the giant Smurfs and the huge trees and the flying dragons and shit. The environment was a character. So when we look at the Oasis, what we're really talking about is this is Anorak's stomping ground. This is his playground, his command. It's his. You're in the realm that is the origination of his imagination. And the entire story, as far as this alternate reality, is really Anorak's reality. This is his character that you're playing within. And he is sort of a ghost in the shell, as it were, that permeates through the story a little bit at first. But for the most part, the entire world that you're within is sitting on top of a code base that is within that realm Anorak. And that is the character that I enjoy the most in this story.
Well, you took mine. I was mine was going to be Halliday. I think Halliday more than Anorak.
Okay.
Because his signature is all over this story. He set this entire contest up for a very specific purpose, and it goes back to Willy Wonka. He was thinking of the type of person that he wanted to win. You know what I mean? And it's bizarre, but it's a trip through this man's imagination. Like you're literally living in somebody's imagination. And it's very fitting that that's sort of how they framed the trailer with the music that they used and everything. Mm-hmm. The world of pure imagination. That's what Oasis is, and it's not necessarily like whatever you can imagine you can do. That's true. If you go on Reddit today, whatever you can imagine, I guarantee you there's a fucking subreddit for it. So the idea that, if you open source it, that shit'll fill up really quickly is completely plausible and definitely would happen. But I think that, where when you swing into the parts that were specifically designed by Halliday, you can tell there's just a richness to it and there's a sincerity to it. And that's why I think too that, Ernest Cline kind of comes into the conversation as sort of a character in the story up to this point. You know what I mean? Because if you're into level 1, you've already decided, I think, if you love or hate this book. And by the time you get there, you had to have thought to yourself, if you didn't know, if you weren't us, you didn't know who wrote this book, you just picked up Ready Player One because you'd heard about it. If you love this book, you have flipped back to the front page and said, who the fuck wrote this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's that moment of pause. I mean, I think I was maybe 5 chapters into this book before I like set it down, pulled up my computer, and read everything that I could about Ernest Cline. You know what I mean?
And then you realize there's a competition and that you're 5 years too late.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Fuck, I could have gotten that.
But
I'd have lost that shit.
Angie, we'll maybe bring this up with her when we record 18 because she's supposed to come back. But she was, I want to say that she was like, she was really fighting for it and had made her way through a couple of the checkpoints.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fucking cool.
I don't want to speak for her.
Okay.
And she's probably, when she hears this, she's probably immediately going to get a hold of me on Twitter and call me an asshole for just misrepresenting what she told me. But that's how I remember it a little bit. But I won't go into detail on that. That's her story to tell. But still, it's just, he is very much a character in this story, because I think there are overtones of him being Halliday. It's really bizarre because, like, at times, it's like Halliday writing Wade's character. You know what I mean? That's sort of the relationship that I get out of it. Like, it's Halliday is the grown-up Wade writing Wade into existence almost. Sure. And it's
deep.
It's really that's Ernest Cline's relationship with the character. And to me, I think that's why, even though Halliday is only brought up a couple of times, you get this sort of love that exists between the two of them. I mean, it's, in a lot of ways, it's like, I did this for you. You know what I mean? Like, he was right, and I think to Halliday it was probably arbitrary. Like, I'm writing this to the one person that I could possibly relate to.
Right. Help me, Obi-Wan. You're my only hope.
Somebody has got to figure that, has got to be on that wavelength. And I mean, at almost every touch point, and I think I don't want to get into this too much because it bleeds into level 2 and some really interesting conversation about how he wrote Artemis. But there's just sort of like, Wade's almost got this superpower throughout the first part of the book that he just sees through, almost like the Matrix code of the Oasis.
Yeah. Because
he understands it on Halliday's level. He's the only one that seems to approach it from, like, you have to be the man. You know what I mean?
There are a lot of places in the book where he very specifically says that he gets into a rhythm. He can see the pattern. See the pattern in the game within the game.
Yeah.
And that seems to traverse in a meta sort of way through his experience in the Oasis.
But isn't it interesting? Because, like, he talks about the hunt for the egg, right? Mm-hmm. But his love is not necessarily for the hunt. And it's not really to preserve the Oasis as it is. He's not like a freedom fighter, as it's like, he's a lot of these Gunter clans are framing him to be. He is literally looking out for the legacy of Halliday. Because at more points than he talks about, Gunter culture and all this shit, I mean, like, he talks about it as it's something that operates on the periphery of what he's doing. Because to him, it's not about that. Like, he's graduated to this level of understanding with Halliday that, it's almost fatherly. Like, he feels a responsibility to the guy who built this because they relate on that level. I don't know. It's really interesting the way his character kind of develops beyond this level one.
Right.
Because I mean, I think there are periods, and this isn't really a spoiler, but like you see him sort of rebelling against that to a certain degree, and then coming into it, it's just like it's this very interesting character development for Wade that operates on the periphery of the story.
I think
It's
that's
something to look at.
super insightful because when you really reflect back, he knows more about Halliday than he knows about his father or his mother or even the relatives he lives with. I mean, deep, deep. Now, granted, he admits that what he knows is through what the media provides, uh, Anorak's Almanac, the handful of resource material, and what other people have uncovered, and of course, what's also in the Oasis. But that's a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
that's crazy deep, and it was intentional too. So I could totally see there being this sort of relationship between him and Halliday that has this sort of mentor or uh, Jedi master slash father figure where he's just researching everything he can, and as a result, he just gains this sort of respect.
And there's an interesting thing that happens toward the end of the book that I want to go into, and I want to revisit this part of our conversation when we get there.
Mm.
We'll talk about it offline because I'm excited about it. But 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 yeah, it's an interesting character development for Wade throughout the book, and like I said, if you read it through the first time, I mean, and you read it for the fun of it, which is the way that I would recommend anybody read this book. It's a great adventure. It's a decent character that you can get frustrated with a lot of the time, but on the periphery, there is some depth to the character and to the story, and what he clings to and how he views this situation. How I mean, the separation from of Wade from reality through the Oasis doesn't just happen on a you know on a visual level or a sensory level. It's something like there's some emotion behind it too. Um, but anyways, before I peel back the onion layers, did you guys have anything else you wanted to add to this?
I mean, about the
Level
uh,
one
level
in
one.
general.
I was thinking about level one in the context of the entire book, and I keep trying to determine whether or not it's my favorite of the three levels or not. And I would say that I probably go back and forth between level one and level three.
Okay.
But I would also say that as I'm listening to level one, I'm like, oh yeah, level one's the shit. Love level one. Love the world building. I love learning all these new characters over again. I don't think I've ever felt that level two was my favorite of the three, but there are definitely parts of level three that are like, I'm just, yeah, get totally sucked in.
Oh yeah.
I'll agree. I would like level one for me is I think my favorite, and the reason why is because it is for me the origin story. It's him moving from being a kid and using his knowledge to sort of being the master, and it's discovering new characters. It is truly the crest of the wave. It is the cutting edge of the story. That shit is happening, and he has to grow very fast, and he's discovering who his enemies are and who his friends are, and it just that defining the situation. It's a bit like for me like a zombie movie. Anything beyond the first wave of Harry Carey in a zombie movie is boring to me. Like this constant like trudge of, oh, there's zombies at the gate, but the real problem is inside the house and we're inside the mall and has been for the past 6 years. No, give me why the zombies happened, people dealing with it, a whole new situation, and them having to coagulate something that represents society in the midst of this immediate and sudden turmoil. To me, I find fascinating and exciting. Anything beyond that, you've really got to come original in order to keep my attention.
How about this? What would you say to somebody who had just finished level one and was unsure if they were going to keep reading?
What would I say to them?
Yeah, like how would you give them hope that there's so much more great shit coming?
How would you reinforce a new hope in the rest of the story?
Yeah, exactly.
Blow up the Death Star.
Because I every so often on Reddit you see somebody say, "Oh, I'm like 7 or 8 chapters in," and it's like, when does this get good? It's like,
Definitely not chapter 17.
I think that's the perfect place to cap it. That's been our recap of level 1, folks. Thank you very much for joining us this week. We'll see you in chapter 18. Until then, my name is Ryan.
This is Chris.
and I'm Aaron.
And that's the show. Till next time, so long. I don't really know how to close out the episode this time. I don't know why I'm struggling on closing out episodes now. Somebody fucking help me out. What do you say? Anybody?
Well, that's it for the recap of level 1.